my research is around what happens when educators are out in their schools. They're authentically themselves with their students. They bring in their authentic, life experience, their family, the way that every teacher does, to make connections, to build community. You have to get to know people. It's not foreign for a teacher to share aspects of their life with students, especially who they love that they have in their life. So, but something happens to that teacher when they do that. And then something else happens to the classroom. That classroom changes in beautiful ways. There could be ruptures too, and I mean many things that happen, but the classroom changes, and the larger school as well.
Welcome to Purposeful Empathy, a show that's dedicated to amplifying the voices of people from across the globe who understand that the world needs more empathy and are doing something about it. This season is devoted to the power of empathy in education. Meet 12 visionary leaders from the Transformative Educational Leadership Fellowship Program and learn how they are bringing meaningful change to their schools. You won't want to miss a single episode, so hit the subscribe button now. Thanks for watching. Enjoy the show. Welcome to a new episode of Purposeful Empathy. Today, I'm joined by José Jiménez, a Deputy Superintendent of District 24 in Queens, New York City. He brings over 16 years of experience in education. Before stepping into his leadership role, Jose was a principal of ACE Academy for Scholars, where his innovative approach and commitment to educational excellence earned him widespread recognition. His passion for nurturing the next generation of educators also led him to teach as an adjunct professor at the City University of New York, Brooklyn College. A strong advocate for equity and inclusion, Jose has led numerous initiatives to promote these values, weaving academic rigor with social and emotional learning to create a more holistic educational experience. He's also completed several national leadership fellowships, furthering deepening his impact in the field. And what sets Jose apart is his belief in the power of mindfulness and well-being. As a registered yoga teacher and dedicated Vipassana meditator, he integrates health and wellness into his educational philosophy, creating inclusive, supportive learning environments where students can thrive. This season, I'm exploring the power of empathy in education, and I've invited Jose to be a guest because that's precisely what he practices and exemplifies. And I want to welcome you to the show, Jose.
Hello, I'm so honored to be here. Grateful.
Ready for this conversation.
Yeah.
I want to share at the onset that back in high school, or maybe it was in Quebec, we have something just after high school, sort of like a pre-college for 2 years. I took an aptitude test on like what kind of profession I should be. And based on this assessment, I was told that I should become a high school principal.
Mhm.
So I have this strong affection for high school principals because I was supposedly supposed to be one. And I had a high school principal that was very kind to me. So again, I have a strong affection for principals, although that might not be the exception than the rule, right? Sometimes being hauled into the principal's office is not a good thing. So anyways, I'm grateful to have this chat with you. Apart from the bio, which of course is really impressive, and before you were a principal, you were a vice principal or assistant principal, and even before that, I just learned that you were a elementary school teacher for 7 years. I wonder if you could explain, like maybe the backstory of your life that would sort of color in the pivots and what brought you to this passion that you have for education.
Yeah. It's funny. I can't remember. I took one of those assessments too, and I can't remember uh, what was my destined path, but I don't think it was educator, but here I am. And actually, for a very long time, I did not, I had a different dream. I wanted to be a filmmaker, and I just loved movies, and that was my what I thought I was going to do, and I went to school at New York University to sort of pursue that. Um, and as life would have it, when I was 24, I became a New York City teaching fellow. And I thought, let me just try. I really, want to make an impact. I want to do something that's of service, but I didn't know if I would like it. And so there was this kind of time bound, let me see if it's for me. And they put me because the way that the program worked, they placed you in either elementary, middle, or high school, and in bilingual education, which even though I didn't go to school in a bilingual setting. I definitely continued my Spanish education all throughout college and would take classes. So I thought it was powerful that students would be able to be learning both languages, even from elementary school. And so they put me in a class, a fourth grade class, which was around the same grade that when I arrived to this country, in Miami. And so I was teaching kids that I felt had a very similar story to my own. And it was a very powerful year because it was challenging. I know I cried quite a bit with them as well. Just because of how challenging it is to be new, to be different, to be in an environment where you're having to learn things that others just kind of know from birth, and I just related to them so much, and then I, continued and really found a love for teaching. And saw that I had an actual talent for it, and that I, continued getting a master's, and then folks in the field would say, you'd make a great leader, you should pursue that, and then it just sort of happened. I feel like a lot of synchronicities led me to where I am now.
Now, I know you care a lot about social emotional learning, and here you are just expressing how you cried with your students. I want to take a moment to just breathe more space into that because I think that's a very powerful story. I think you in a classroom of kids that are sort of learning what it means to live in America, right? And you
Yeah,
are
there were
learning to live
newcomers.
total newcomers because that's still happening, right? I mean, you had that experience many years ago, but I mean, 2025, that's still happening.
Yeah,
So
every day.
what do you think we need to know about that experience for those newcomer kids and the role that educators, especially those who have some lived experience, can play in those children's lives?
Yeah, I think what's taken for granted sometimes is just the experience and the expansiveness of what it means to be in a new country. We, now in when I go to another country, I go to Thailand or I go, to a place in Europe, like just that feeling of being in a new place, hearing a new language, seeing new people, how your mind starts expanding by the sheer nature of being in a new space. Um, and what that means that you're very alert, you're soaking things in, but then things are also affecting you in a way that is almost accelerated
Mm.
because it's and the more time you spend, naturally, the more you acclimate to that change. So I think educators have to be aware of what it means. Sometimes it's taken for granted, and I mean by that, educators get a new class every year, and sometimes it begins to feel um uh you have a system down of how to educate, and then but every new student brings a new perspective and a new experience. Um, and really the importance of getting to know each one. And particularly now, and our district is located in Queens, where, as they say, all of the world lives in Queens. And we have students that their journeys to our schools, while they might all be newcomers, they didn't all arrive having the same monolithic experience. Some of them had very tragic ways of coming here. Some, have a fairly smooth uh, path, and others also are separated from family members, from not just from their peers, like that experience, but also from family. And sometimes they're meeting family members for the
Mm.
first time, and it could be a parent, and that was very common, and that experience that I had my first year, it was that in opening up, doing a community circle with the class, that we would begin a morning meeting, just speaking about ourselves and our families and where we come from, and just the wide range of stories led to, there being a real outpouring of, um, you know, uh, understanding.
And I imagine those students that were in your class, when you had some tears to wipe away off your cheeks, you probably made a very big impression on them that we're in this together and you're not alone, and that really probably mattered to those kids.
Yeah. I mean, I wish I could say that it was my first year as well teaching, and actually how that story transpired was that I did this and they were crying and then I was crying, and there were children that were expressing really raw emotions about meeting their mother for the first time because they were with their grandmother back in their country, or that their mother passed away. Like, it just opened this, and this was like day one. This was my first day of gathering students, and then the assistant principal walked in as this was happening, and so I'm trying to understand, the optics of it. And as a new teacher, I didn't have the same toolkit as I do now as an educator, of many years. But at first, I was a bit scared that I had gone too far in sort of opening conversation to be, this deep. And so, while we still continue to have that and we build community, I do feel like it was until a little bit later that I started to embrace social emotional learning more as a data as a practice. The first My first couple of years were, um, I think I fell into the trap that many educators fall. That it's like you're supposed to teach them academics, and you're supposed to, a lot of the supposed tos, and they're supposed to be passing a test and passing, getting good grades, and knowing, having this knowledge so that they can, and meanwhile, the real learning is not possible. All learning is not possible if students are not also feeling like they belong and are in community. Um, so it's like instinctually, I knew that needed to happen, but I do remember feeling a little trepidation around, like, having conversations that might get too personal with students when I first started my career. Um,
So, for those who are bought into the SEL as foundational to the learning, which I agree with, like, you can't learn if you have an empty stomach. You also can't learn if you fear that your kids around you are going to mock you or that you feel like you just don't belong, right? But what do you say to those critics? I mean, there seems to be a pendulum swing in your country, at least, around how to educate the next generation of kids. There's been momentum around, learning assessments that are quite rigid. And now there's this backlash towards DEI as well. What do you say to folks who just doubt that this
SEL stuff is really important.
Yeah, it's kind of a shame that it's come to this, that there is this sort of backlash um, in trying to create inclusive and spaces of belonging, that it would get co-opted to mean uh, kind of what they say is like indoctrinating students into believing. I mean, I've even seen there's a book that was called published like Toxic Empathy, or this idea that you can, you know, connecting with people, their lived experience is somehow um, a bad thing, and that we should instead be more assimilating folks into, which, I mean, assimilation for me is more indoctrination, if that's the, seems like more in line. As opposed to inviting people in to being themselves and being able to share openly and without judgment. I mean, I would say that it's um, when you're thinking about what the ideal school, you would not think of children feeling left out, of feeling like they don't belong, or where children are able to make fun of others for what they have or what they don't have. And I don't think any person would say like, no, that's how life is, and that's how it should be. But that's what happens when educators don't create the conditions for there to be open discussions about how people feel, about how actions make people feel, what are ways that we feel safe, supported, loved, valued. And that's what SEL really at the part is. Like, it's having self-awareness, social awareness, being able to regulate emotions. So you got to talk about that. Like, these are things that um, if the argument is, well, they should have learned that at home, or it's school's just not the place, they should already come knowing that, and if they don't, they should be punished, right? So I think for some folks, it's not the school's responsibility to teach these soft skills of empathy, of self-awareness, social awareness. They're supposed to come already with them. Then we're creating also a very schools as punitive spaces, as because we all know that that's not how every child is not exposed to the same things, period. And so the promise of public education is that no matter who you are, no matter what zip code you come from, no matter what family background, wealth, or that you're going to get quality education, which would mean that when there is a lack of some sort, social, whether it's economic or educational, that the schools serve as that space to be able to provide that. And so I would just say, that is the promise of public education. And so it, there are many that do not believe in public education. And so that is, I think, one of the major issues is that some would have it be, private, really privatized. And once you do that, then it becomes, very inequitable. There will be some spaces where students will be getting more than others, and at rates that ultimately hurt us all,
Yeah.
because we're all affected by everyone that lives, that's around us. And so,
Well, you've certainly made the case for SEL, and you certainly have shown why you've climbed rank. You were an elementary school teacher, then a was it principal or
and here
assistant?
they call it assistant principal. Vice is the same in other states. And
Okay, so I'm imagining people who are watching or listening this particular series of shows on purposeful empathy devoted to empathy and education. They're most likely going to be educators themselves. So I wonder if you could speak to, as you have been working through the system, having, a different set of responsibilities, but also seeing things that sort of like ever increasingly bird's eye view. What do you think teachers misunderstand about administrators? And how do you think a little bit more empathy going both ways would help the relationship?
Yeah, that's a good question. Um, I think one of the big issues is sort of understanding what each one does. I think for administrators, sometimes before they become, let's say, the principal of the school, they might have gone through a position of assistant principal, or maybe they were a coach, or there might have been a couple positions in between there, or they went to the district, did professional, some other capacity, and then became. So sometimes they're far removed from the teacher, like in a classroom with just one group of students, or if you're in middle or high school, many groups of students. And I think there's like an amnesia that sometimes happens where folks forget what it was like. And teachers sometimes can see that right away. Like this person doesn't remember what it was like. And that then leads to they're not able to empathize because they've kind of moved too far.
What would be an example of something that they would forget?
Um, I think in elementary school, for example, which is kind of where a lot of my experience is that um, class size. So you could have up to 32. Now there's a law in New York City, and classes are starting to become smaller. And by I think 2028, they have to be a lot smaller than they used to be. But you could have up to now to 32 students in a class in first grade. So those are 32 6-year-olds. And naturally class, depending on your experience or where you came from, if you were in another state, and your experience could have been different around what it means. There are children that sometimes have IEPs, so you could have a classroom. Your experience could be with children that have learning differences, that have you're working with another teacher because it's a cooperative model, integrated cooperative model, and that could mean that you know there's a sort of a gap of experience between what a principal or assistant principal might have experienced, and teachers feeling like you don't know what it's like because you might have never done it. But I think it's the demands that sometimes are placed on teachers. They weren't necessarily the demands that those leaders experienced. So it's how you consolidate the ask with the experience. And for many folks it feels like and I could see how leaders will say, we work, our hours are longer than teachers in some respects. Um, we're working, but it's different when you're in a classroom with 32, sets of eyes, uh, you know, kind of waiting to see what happens next. And so I think there's a bit of that. Um,
Amnesia.
yeah, amnesia. So, which is why I really believe as a principal, I would my first up to COVID, because then things kind of changed a bit, but I would do a musical theater production with kids. I would meet with them after school. I would go into classrooms and as much as possible coach teachers, model lessons. Definitely earlier on that I was very in the classroom, more in the classroom. Um, uh, Sort of to not forget and to also continue to develop, feel like I wasn't asking anything of my teachers that I couldn't do or that I wasn't willing to do, and I wasn't willing to do it in front of them.
Mm.
Um, I think so there are ways that you can fight that amnesia.
I like that. That's a call to action for anyone listening. Well, on the same, I mean, okay, similar vein, what do you think the general public or parents need to know about the work that you in education, teachers or administrators do, um, to dispel some misunderstandings? Like how would you like to advocate on behalf of the teaching staff, writ large? Like, hey, guys, what I'd really like you to know is,
Yeah, I mean, I feel like there's a subset of folks that and maybe it's not so much parents, but general public that just how they feel about education, that it's in at the elementary school level, you hear this a lot, like, oh, it's a babysitting service, or like this is where you know they're kind of just watching your child, um and schools as sort of sites for that. I would say it's a very complex job and career, and really it's a calling for the vast majority of folks that enter. It You have to feel compelled to continue doing it, uh, because it is not easy. It requires a lot of cognitive demands. And while, an elementary school teacher in first grade is not teaching calculus, and so you might think that that's a cognitive demand, but being able to, again, understand the 20, 36-year-olds that all have needs, that are developing where they are developmentally in both physical, psychological, emotional spaces, sort of, and then the dynamics, and being able to work with the dynamics of when you put people together, things happen, right? There are social issues that occur. The classroom really becomes a microcosm of a society, of a little mini society, and the teacher is there, has the opportunity to be there as to model what true democracy, a democratic process, a way for students to develop skills, socializing skills, academic skills, and that if done masterfully, is really a sight to see. Like, I've seen it, teachers doing something that, again, you put somebody else in, even a parent that might have 3 children, 4 children, they feel like they have it down. Like, they're able to, but you put them in a classroom of 25 children that aren't theirs. Suddenly it's, whoa. And it's not just to keep them there, it's to do all the things I just said. So I think it's an art, it's a calling. It requires, your mind to be constantly firing and seeing connections, and putting students in the place where they'll be successful. And then also being honest with the fact that you're co-creating this, in many classrooms, by the end, they create charters or values, or, class rules, and it's all, how they were governing themselves. And then, of course, the school does it in a larger, it just kind of expands. But I just think they're microcosms of societies, and the teachers right at the center being facilitating.
When I listen to you, okay, so I teach once a week on a, 3-hour class, and I come home exhausted. And then I just told you earlier that I did a 1-hour presentation in my daughter's grade 3 class and was steamrolled, exhausted. Like, it was just something. So it sounds exhausting. So I want to know, what are some of, especially given that you are a yoga practitioner, Vipassana practitioner, I'd love to know what your go-to self-care is and what you might recommend other people to begin as a practice who are feeling sort of really stretched and on ramp to burnout and all that fun stuff.
Yeah, I mean, this is great and timely. And teacher burnout is a thing, principal burnout, principal leader uh, wellness. The statistics are not very good. So I do feel like this is a big call to action for educators or anyone in a field where you are constantly in a potential state of stress. The teacher's really fielding the rest of their class and then their school in the larger school environment, the energy that's in there. So I personally have a morning and night meditation practice that isn't very it sometimes it's 10 minutes, sometimes it's 30, sometimes it's 5, sometimes it's 2, sometimes it's an hour. It just wherever I am, I give myself the grace that I begin and end the day in silence. Like there's just sort of and breathing. And then I journal in the morning. I picked up the Artist's Way. I think it's Julia Cameron with the morning pages. So I just write 3 pages as a practice. Um, that sometimes I feel like a little stressed out by doing it because I'm like I need to get to work and like I need to finish these 3 pages. But they've become, I mean, now I have so many journals that sometimes I like open them to a random page and it's just like getting to know yourself in another way. So I really appreciate that. And then the other is I go on retreats. I find ways to escape for a weekend where I'm going to be in nature or being able to do physical activity, yoga, which is a passion of mine, and sort of scheduling at least 2 or 3 in a year, and sometimes even longer than just the weekend if I can, because I always feel like that space of reflection then allows me to come back, um, with a different kind of energy that I'm more set up for entering the space with a little more clarity.
Hmm.
And not so much clarity like I figured something out, but more clarity of like because I grounded myself in my why, my purpose, in my physical body and so I just feel better.
Hmm.
Like
Hmm.
not as cog in the machine and or like in autopilot because there was like a change of scenery.
Hmm.
Uh,
Yeah, that sounds very, 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 very important. We all can take a lesson from that. You are pursuing your PhD in urban education, and I know that your program has a unique focus on at the intersection of 2 research agendas. I think the first is that it's interested in curriculum and instruction in urban schools, and then the other one is policy analysis about like sort of the broader political, social, economic issues that determine the context of urban education. And so I guess the question I want to ask you is, I'd love to hear a little bit about your research, but now we're going to veer into a more explicit conversation around empathy in education. So what role you believe empathy plays in curriculum and instruction, like the design and articulation, and then also at the policy level.
yeah. So, I'm a queer person and my journey was tough growing up in my family, being from a very conservative religious family, and I'm a very spiritual person, but what I faced as a queer person growing up and religion was very damning. So um, one of the reasons why I went into education was I felt like as educators, we have a responsibility and we can be a person that students face at some point and can feel supported, affirmed, valued, loved. Um, and I just thought, teachers can change children's lives, it very, in a simple way. And so um, I just thought that that was something that I saw myself. If it's possible for me to change the course of one child's life, that might be coming from a household that doesn't accept them for who they are, but I would, that it would be, um, I mean, worthwhile. And so my research actually has to do with that because when I was a teacher, like I said earlier, my first few years, I was trying to understand what I was doing. I was trying to, it is not easy to be a new teacher. And so I didn't, when children would call each other gay or say something mean to each other, I remember I always addressed it and I would say something like, what does that mean to you? Or, why are you using that word? If it's an insult, why is that an insult? Why can't a person, be gay? But I never said I'm gay. And so I never addressed, I always just didn't bring that into the space, even though I could have. And there's laws that people like me fought for that to be possible. But you self-censor when the climate feels like as we're seeing now too. Um, so uh, it wasn't until I became a school leader that I started to think about what kind of example am I setting if I'm not, if I'm kind of hiding, if I'm just not open and out. But I didn't know how to do that, how to just especially at that in a leadership role, like how to tell students. I had always been out to teachers, and I feel like I should say this only because this is a very polarizing topic. There's across the country, even more so in the past couple of years, so which is why my research is also kind of very timely. That when a teacher goes into their classroom and puts a picture of their husband, if they're a straight cisgender woman puts a picture of their husband, or vice versa, or their kids, or talks about their husband, or no one would bat an eye. There would be no argument as to why that teacher did that. So in reverse, if a male teacher said, my husband, which we know it's legal in the United States, at least up to now, not being able to talk about it in schools would seem discriminatory, or it would seem like that would some have preferential, abilities. But when even in this current climate, even around school leaders, even around educators today, some of them might still feel like that's not a topic to discuss with elementary school children, or the fact that there's different types of families, or that there are two moms, even though there could be a child in that class that has two moms or two dads, but they would not, feel that they could read a book about two moms or two dads, even though that's a child's lived experience in that class. So, by nature of not doing that, that child could go their entire elementary school reading all about different types of families except their own. So I felt that I needed to come out, and my first year as a principal, I ended up coming out, which is a very lovely story because we were celebrating Pride, which was also a big deal because not every school does it, but definitely the New York City Public Schools has really progressive policies around LGBTQ plus students and staff. And it's come a long way because historically, something that I also document in my research is historically, again, that has been because of people organizing to make that happen, for people to start empathizing with folks at their plight. And so we were building this bulletin board right in the beginning of in the front of the school when you enter, and it had all these iconic LGBTQ historical figures and picture books that parents could read with their children that told the history of the rainbow flag. And there was a teacher and a student that was making it, and when I looked at it, I was like, "Oh, this is wonderful, amazing." One of the teachers said, "We left the middle for you, like for me to put my picture on the board." And I thought, like, this is it. This is how I come out to my school community, to the kids, to the parents. And then I could kind of continue that tradition over the years, and other teachers put their pictures on there as well. Some didn't, but some did. But they felt they could, and they felt that they could be themselves in their classrooms. And so my research is around what happens when educators are out in their schools. They're authentically themselves with their students. They bring in their authentic, life experience, their family, the way that every teacher does, to make connections, to build community. You have to get to know people, right? Both the teacher and the students. We ask students to tell us about their family and their siblings, and write a story about a time that interview your grandparents. We share ourselves with them. That's how we all care about each other. So it's not foreign for a teacher to share aspects of their life with students, especially who they like love that they have in their life. So, but something happens to that teacher when they do that, right? Because for a big, probably like my story, I was scared of doing that. Again, even though there were legal protections, there was fear. What will the parents say? What will the students say? It could backfire. A parent could come the next morning and say, "I want my child out of that room. I don't, that person is trying to do something to my, there could be allegations." So out of fear, sometimes people do not they self-censor. And so something happens to that teacher once they have that courage, kind of take that leap. And then something else happens to the classroom. That classroom changes in beautiful ways. There could be ruptures too, and I mean many things that happen, but the classroom changes, and the larger school as well. So I'm kind of tracing out educators in their schools, predominantly that are of color too, because then intersectional identities also in large urban setting is part of the reality, and also the research lacks in representation of different perspectives. So I'm definitely focusing on trying to get a wide range of experiences. And then the other connecting piece is the history of the Proud Educators, which is a organization of queer educators, teachers, paraprofessionals, principals here in New York City, that was founded around 2013, and that I'm a part of, and that we have storytelling nights. We do workshops at the CUNY Graduate Center, have presented at the LGBT Center. So we hold events in schools, and basically that network of teachers that are hearing other teachers coming out, that are hearing what it's like to be an out educator, the importance of hearing kids. So we've had student events where they talk about what's the impact of having an openly queer teacher in your school as a GSA, like the Gender and Sexuality Alliances, and like how, again, life-saving it could be to see that there's someone else, like you in a position of influence and not feeling as isolated. So hearing from them, it's made some of them come out for the first time. It's made, folks transition. So many things. It's just so I want to capture the history because some of those folks are also part of that, the interviews, and also part of my story because it includes autoethnography as well.
Mm.
Um, yeah, there's a through line to queer teacher organizing, or just teachers organizing to make something happen, um, and sort of the impacts that has on the individual, the classroom, and the school.
Well, good luck with that. I think it sounds so important. And having written a dissertation, if ever you need, call just to help nudge
Definitely.
you, happy to help. So I have
I
two
will take you up
questions.
on that.
Great, great, great. I have two questions left. And we're taping this in March of 2025. This is coming out end of summer, early new academic year. So who knows where the world will be in a few months from now. But um, Elon Musk, this is a CNN story that caught my attention, shared on a famous podcast recently that he believes the empathy is the downfall of Western civilization. So I'd like to know why you believe empathy, or what role you believe empathy plays in education.
Well, I mean, first, it's just insane that we're getting our advice, or that he has such a pub stage to make comments like that so many will hear and just run with. Uh, I, personally, empathy, to like, it is the way that I understand why I'm here and what we're doing here and what this all is about. I don't, there. So I know, you can accumulate a lot of things and be very well, and we all know the stories, right? None of that could bring you happiness. And at the end, you don't take anything with you. And you could be the most miserable human being having the most amount of things. So, like, the kind of objectifying life as being strictly material and strictly for the purpose of gaining things. You can go down that path. It sounds like he's really loving that path. But I see it as a dead end. And so then what else is there? So if it's not things, what, other than things, there are people. And, we're brought here through people, literally and figuratively, in all ways. People are the ways that we develop with and around. And so I can't think how that's not how we could just say that that's not important, how we relate, how we connect, how we treat each other, how we understand each other, how that could be the downfall of humankind. I mean, it's I feel like we're only here, we've only reached this level of humanity because we've worked together and made connections, and through empathy, because we've protected each other, we've sort of fought for our own survival and liberation in whatever forms at different times in history. So I can't see a future where that is like where we're thriving, and that's not part of the equation. I can see a future where some folks are thriving in their minds and with a lot of things, and a lot of people are suffering, and that sort of world where um, uh, it's like the pyramid. a lot of people at the bottom and a few on the top. And so I just feel like comments like that are key are just, trying to continue um uh the movement of humanity towards um there being more for the few and less for the many.
Hmm.
Um but yeah, I mean, I personally am also um very emotional person. Like even though I've had my journey of understanding my emotions and still are on that journey, but I can't see how I'm for, I don't, I know enough now to understand that I'm not purely unique in that. So if I am living in this emotion, having this emotional life, and as well as physical and psychological, so is everybody else in their own way. And so for me to try to shut it off because I have this idea that it's not, you shouldn't be thinking about other people's feelings. You shouldn't try to understand them. You shouldn't, um, uh, it would be counterintuitive to what's happening in I would have to be also kind of in denial of
Hmm.
my own uh, sort of lived experience and day to day. Um, so I don't understand how people can kind of want to I don't know if I was gonna say like the word in Spanish, but like automate themselves so much that it's like that they're just neutral. Like
Mhm.
and that and I when I think of Elon Musk, I think a little like Data from Star Trek, like very like he's learning to be a human. I don't so I think he has some evolution to do. Not to get personal, but like when making comments like that, I feel like our he would benefit from a little more empathy.
And if we knew history, we would know that the lack of empathy is the runway to some really very frightening outcomes. Just the notion of othering people is the beginning, and then it can just go down a really bad path very quickly. So in terms of empathy and education, you've made the case earlier on that it's not only the container in which children who come through spaces of learning can feel empathy from their classmates or from their educators, but it's a place where we can learn to practice empathy and extend empathy to become more empathic people out in the world. And so why wouldn't we do that, right? Last question, and this is of a personal nature. I ask this of all my guests at the end of at the end of our conversation, and that is, Jose, can you think of a time in your life when you were on the receiving end of empathy and what that meant for you?
The receiving end of empathy.
Like a specific moment.
I guess when I to connect it to what I said earlier, my coming out experience, I felt like with my parents was not empathetic, right? I felt rejected and abandoned, and in that moment, I felt like I was misunderstood and sort of seen as just foreign and alien. But other people in my life around that time did come sort of huddle around me and were very moved by, I think it just that experience of seeing a friend, or for my sister was very supportive at that time, my older sister, just seeing somebody going through that experience that they knew that it was very close to them, I know made them, because some of them naturally said like put themselves in my shoes and feel like what that rejection, if your parents suddenly said, like, that love seemed very conditional in that moment. And so I had friends that I felt very supported by, and that they would do anything for me, and really, yeah, were feeling my pain. It was visible. It was energetic. They were feeling what I was feeling, at least in the sense of connection. And so I feel like that's one example that definitely is very, for anyone that's queer and has had a story of coming out, that was not celebration. um, I think they would relate as well.
Hmm. One of the reasons I love asking this question, I don't know the story I'll hear, but I inevitably am reminded personally, it's like at the end of each conversation, I'm re-anchored to the idea that empathy can be such a game changer in someone's life. And we can all benefit from turning up the volume of empathy in our lives. But I think in your case in particular, Jose, given the moment that we're in, the moment that America's in, um, empathy for the LGBTQ plus community is really important right now. We're seeing women's rights being stripped, and where it's all going to end is, we got to stand up as allies with empathy for people of all experiences, because we're all human. And at the end of the day, like, why can't we just be kinder to one another, right?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. I mean, trans folks are being attacked, queer folks, all in all spectrums. And it just, for me, I always keep thinking about I forgot, it's I think a poem, first they came for the Jews and we didn't do anything. Then they came for just the, the, the nature of, like, when it's not your group, there is sometimes like, well, it's not impacting me. And some feel, so to your point about how important empathy is, that if you don't do it, and you don't do it with the group that's, the immigrants right now, or like eventually it will be your group,
Mhm.
whatever group you're part of, that you right now don't think is at the margins, you know and so, because when you follow that logic, eventually the group that isn't is very, very wealthy.
Mhm. Mhm.
And then they're part of all the other groups, but because they're so wealthy, none of that, they're sort of like immune to
Yeah,
any of those things.
doesn't matter.
So it doesn't matter. It's a um so yeah, empathy saves lives. It allows people to not forget that what's happening to somebody else is also happening to you. And if it's not right now, it might be later.
Well, let's end on that note. It was a fantastic conversation, Jose. Really, thank you for spending the time. Good luck with your dissertation, research,
Thanks so
and
much.
your work in New York, in the Bronx, not the Bronx,
No,
in Brooklyn,
Queens.
in Queens,
In
in
Queens. So you're
Queens.
going all through the city.
Terrible, in Queens. And I want to thank everybody who's been watching and listening. We'll see you next week at Purposeful Empathy.
If you know someone who would benefit from this episode, please share it with them. Post the link to your socials and hit the subscribe button now. The world needs more empathy, and you have an important role to play.